Hello, Curly. Hiya, Buck. How's your folks?
Oh, just fine, Ringo, except my
Never in Western movies has a film been as visually intense and haunting as Stagecoach. From the dangerous taunts performed by the legendary stuntman Yakima Canutt to the depressive, climactic condition of the locations, the horror depicted in Stagecoach is nothing compared to the discomfort and terror the crew members experienced on set. Do you know that a lot of people, even animals, suffered severe injuries due to director John Ford's insistence on realism rather than using a dummy or CGI for dangerous and risky scenes? What about the weather conditions that were extremely hard to bear? At some point, the film nearly didn't happen because the weather wouldn't comply with the script. Funny, but in a way, favorable weather was manufactured. Surprised? Of course you should. Many more breathtaking, weird experiences in this movie would be unraveled soon. Therefore, sit up and pick up your popcorn as we dive into the 20 weird facts you didn't know about Stagecoach. No computer-generated imagery, it was all raw risk. Authenticity, rawness, and remote acting. This is not because the director chose to take such a risk just for the purpose of realism, but because there were no digital effects, green screens, and safety harnesses in those days. Hence, every piece of action, including the thundering gallop, perilous stunt, and breathless chase across the dry alkali flats, was performed for real. One of the film's most daring stunts was designed and performed by Yakima Canutt, a former rodeo champion turned stunt coordinator and performer. In the film's climactic chase scene, Canutt, doubling as an attacking Apache, leaps from a galloping horse onto the lead team of the Stagecoach. After being shot, he drops between the moving horses and grabs the coupling pole. Being dragged underneath, he has the entire Stagecoach thunder over him. Many have thought that this stunt was performed by a dummy or a trick shot, but it was Canutt himself, risking it all. When he was asked in an interview about how he was able to achieve that, he said, "You have to run the horses fast, about 37 miles an hour, so they'll stay straight. If they slow down, they start moving side to side, and that'll kill you. When you go under the coach, your elbows better be in, or that axle will take them off." This was undoubtedly iconic. There were no cables or digital enhancements to soften the danger. Canutt relied on his own expertise, the steadiness of the horses, and carefully placed metal bars between the teams to give him just enough clearance. It was so dangerous that when some crew members doubted whether they'd captured it on camera, John Ford reportedly said, "They better have it, because we're not doing it again." Modern stunt coordinators still study Stagecoach because it established templates for action choreography under real conditions. There were no multiple takes padded by safety nets. Mistakes could mean injuries and in some cases death. It's been more than 80 years since the release of Stagecoach, and the lack of CGI has been part of what gives the film its unique legacy. Extreme weather and remote lodging. Although the beauty of Stagecoach was breathtaking, it came at a physical cost that few people outside the production team ever saw. The iconic Monument Valley landscapes, which reflect sprawling desert and luminous skies, were very difficult to live in. The cast and crew of Stagecoach spent weeks battling the extremes of nature, staying at an abandoned civilian conservation corps camp near Kayenta, Arizona, situated at nearly 5,700 feet above sea level. What do you expect from such a location? Extreme heat. The CCC camp was not built for comfort. These facilities were originally constructed in the 1930s as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal work relief programs meant to house young men building trails, planting trees, or digging irrigation ditches, not to host a full film production. When the Stagecoach crew arrived, they found themselves in Spartan military-style quarters. What they saw was unheated bunkhouses, thin mattresses, shared washrooms, and few amenities. Actor Andy Devine, who played the Stagecoach driver Buck, later joked, "We were so far from anything that even the weather didn't know how to get there." That was only a slight exaggeration. Days were long and hot. The desert sun was intense, causing fatigue and dehydration during filming. But the opposite was the case in the night. The high desert elevation meant temperatures dropped sharply, going down below freezing in the evenings. Cast members recalled shivering in thin blankets, struggling to sleep after 12 to 14 hours of filming in the day. John Ford himself reportedly joked, "At night, you'd freeze your ass off. During the day, you'd cook in it." Claire Trevor, who played Dallas, also recalled in later interviews, "It was a rough shoot. We were eating canned food, sleeping in wooden cots. You could hear the coyotes outside. There were no trailers. You just roughed it." As if that was not enough, the crew faced sudden windstorms that kicked up blinding dust. Equipment had to be sandbagged, cameras protected with makeshift coverings, and shots sometimes abandoned due to visibility. Still, Ford insisted on natural light and real landscapes. When cinematographer Burt Glennon suggested they break and wait for better weather, Ford reportedly snapped, "That's what makes it look real. This ain't Pasadena." Transportation to and from the location was also another challenge. Roads were almost non-existent. Vehicles would often get stuck in sand, and supplies had to be hauled in from hours away. There was an infamous situation when a truck carrying camera gear broke an axle in the middle of nowhere. The crew had to wait almost a full day for a replacement part to arrive. But despite these hardships, the rawness of the environment was what gave Stagecoach a texture that studio-bound productions lacked. Running W harness wires caused injury. Although Stagecoach is remembered as a landmark movie in American cinema, it also carries a darker legacy in film history, marked by the use of the running W stunt technique, a method that brought spectacular action to the screen, often at the expense of animal welfare. The running W was a mechanical rigging device designed to produce dramatic horse falls. It is done by tying a thin but strong wire to a horse's front legs, usually attached via leather straps or metal rings. The other end of the wire is anchored to another fixed object off camera. As the horse gaped forward during the scene, the wire would snap tight, yanking the animal's front legs from under it, causing it to trip and fall violently to the ground. This created an undeniably spectacular result. The realism of the stunts wowed the audiences of 1939. However, it was something else behind the scenes. Horses were frequently injured. Broken legs, dislocated shoulders, and internal trauma were common. Crew members recounted seeing blood as the wire snapped tight. Stuntman Yakima Canutt, who choreographed many of the film's action scenes, defended the practice at the time but later helped develop safer alternatives. John Ford, who loves realism, insisted on using real horses for real falls. Ford's focus was always on the shot. When his assistant director voiced concern about using the device too often, Ford allegedly dismissed it with a curt, "We're not making a nature film, we're making a Western." However, not everyone was pleased with his choice. Silent protests had already been rising from within the industry. Human rights groups, especially the American Humane Association, were aware of the technique and had begun lobbying for its ban. Looking back, the use of the running W in Stagecoach is a stark reminder of how the early film industry prioritized spectacle over ethics. The Apaches didn't shoot the horses because that would have been the end of the movie. In one of the film's most memorable sequences, a stagecoach hurtles through the rugged terrain of the American West, pursued by a band of Apaches in a heart-pounding chase. Bullets and arrows were flying through the air and tension mounted with each passing moment. This is why many viewers were wondering why the Apaches didn't shoot the horses. When asked this very question, Ford gave an answer that remained legendary in film history. He said, "Because that would have been the end of the movie." This simple response reveals a profound truth about the nature of storytelling in film. Ford was being honest. There is always a need for drama, momentum, and a narrative that grips the audience. Had the scene unfolded with tactical realism, the story would have come to a halt just when it needed to reach an intense pitch. The Apache chase scene was more than just an action set piece. It was created as a technique of tension, choreographed and executed with astonishing technical precision for its time. Cutting it short with a well-aimed arrow to a horse would have robbed the film of one of its emotional and cinematic high points. So why didn't the Apaches shoot the horses? Because the scene wasn't about winning or losing a battle, it was about the thrill of the chase and the fear of the unknown. The Navajo tribespeople were used as Apaches in Stagecoach. When Stagecoach rolled into production in 1939, director John Ford and his team sought to create an authentic and gripping Western experience, capturing the brutal spirit of the American frontier. So they made a notable but ironic choice in the film's casting, which was the use of Navajo tribespeople to portray the film's Apache warriors. They featured both in the thrilling mounted chase scenes and as background extras. At first glance, this decision might seem like a historical or cultural mismatch. The Apaches and Navajos are distinct tribes with different languages, customs, and histories. However, the filmmakers never considered these factors. They were only interested in the economic advantage their presence would yield. From a practical standpoint, hiring Navajo tribespeople to fill the ranks of the Apache attackers brought a level of authenticity to the action sequences. These Native American actors were often skilled horsemen and riders, bringing the necessary physical strength and presence to the screen. But beyond the practical aspect, the casting choice brought jobs and income to the area, as many Navajos were employed as extras, riders, and in support roles during filming. This infusion of money was significant at a time when many Native American communities faced economic hardship and limited opportunities. Louis Gruenberg's musical score was ignored. Stagecoach was widely celebrated for its dynamic direction and the way it redefined the Western genre. But one of the lesser-known oddities buried within the film's production is the curious case of Louis Gruenberg, the acclaimed composer who received screen credit for a musical score that was never actually used. Gruenberg was a respected classical composer with a strong reputation in American music circles. He had written operas, concert works, and film scores. When he was brought on to compose the score for Stagecoach, it seemed perfect. But in a twist that might only happen in Hollywood, his music never made it into the final cut. Director John Ford, who had an unusual approach to music and film, decided not to use Gruenberg's original compositions. Instead, Ford and music director RKO's Roy Webb opted for a patchwork of American folk tunes, popular Western melodies, and traditional songs to accompany the film's action. So why the change? Ford never fully explained his decision, but he was known for not trusting overly formal scores. In fact, he often preferred music that existed within the world of the film itself. Ford believed that the music should rise naturally out of the story. Gruenberg's more symphonic approach may have simply clashed with Ford's vision of raw authenticity, but despite not being used, Gruenberg still received screen credit as the composer. Dr. Boone misquoted a classical literature piece. One of the more unexpected moments in Stagecoach comes when the drunken but oddly eloquent Dr. Josiah Boone recites a line of classical verse. Looking upon the ostracized Dallas, he speaks with a sorrowful voice but with deep reverence. "Is this the face that wrecked 1,000 ships and burned the towerless tops of Ilium?" To a casual viewer, the line may sound familiar, perhaps even like a Shakespeare piece. But the line is, in fact, a misquoted version of Christopher Marlowe's most famous passage from the tragical history of Dr. Faustus, first published in 1604. The correct line, as Marlowe wrote, is, "Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium?" The original context is completely different. In Marlowe's play, the scholar Faust, having sold his soul to the devil, looked upon the conjured image of Helen of Troy and uttered these words, immortalizing her as the woman whose beauty sparked the Trojan War. So how did Marlowe's verse find its way into a 1939 Hollywood Western? And why was it changed? The first answer is about the character. Dr. Boone, as played by Thomas Mitchell, is more than just an ordinary Western drunk. He is educated but has fallen from grace. He was once a practicing physician, but is now reduced to alcoholism and scorn. His ability to recall classical literature, even in fragments, serves as a glimpse into the man he used to be. The fact that he misquotes the line signals Boone's intellectual decay, a man whose memory is blurred by time and drink. However, some scholars and film historians have speculated that the misquote may have been an actor's choice rather than a scripted decision. Stagecoach was Mickey Simpson's film debut. Apart from launching John Wayne into stardom, Stagecoach also marked the film debut of actor Mickey Simpson. Though uncredited and nearly invisible in the final cut, Simpson's appearance in Stagecoach was the beginning of a career that would span more than 3 decades and over 175 film and television credits. Born Michael Henry Simpson in Rochester, New York in 1913, Mickey Simpson was a well-built man in his prime. Before entering the film industry, Simpson worked as a laborer, bouncer, and most famously a prize fighter. That background and his commanding presence later became his calling card in Hollywood, where he was often cast as tough guys, brawlers, or menacing henchmen. In Stagecoach, Simpson's role is uncredited, but that debut placed him on the radar of none other than John Ford, who had a sharp eye for character actors. Ford's stock company eventually included Simpson as a regular. In fact, Simpson later appeared in at least 9 more Ford films, including My Darling Clementine, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and The Quiet Man. His working relationship with Ford, which began as a faceless extra in Stagecoach, became a career-defining connection. Claire Trevor made more than John Wayne. While Stagecoach is famously remembered for launching John Wayne into cinematic legend, there's no need to forget that at the time of filming, Wayne wasn't a big name yet. Claire Trevor was the one who dominated the screen at that time. She was a seasoned actress whose reputation and box office draw were strong enough to command top billing and a higher paycheck than John Wayne, who would soon become the face of the American West. At the time, Claire Trevor was often referred to as the Queen of Film Noir. With over 25 films to her credit before Stagecoach, Trevor had worked with major studios, top directors, and earned critical respect for playing complex, often emotionally layered characters. She was a bankable name, which was why RKO Pictures brought her in to lend credibility and stability to a film that was, by studio standards, a risky venture. Westerns were considered B-movie material at the time, and Ford's insistence on casting a relatively unknown Wayne in the lead didn't inspire much confidence. On the contrary, John Wayne, by 1939, was far from a household name, but Ford believed in him. Though exact figures vary by source, Trevor's salary for Stagecoach was roughly $15,000, while Wayne was paid around $3,700. In other words, Trevor made more than 4 times what Wayne did on the same film. Trevor played Dallas, the outcast prostitute with a heart. Even Ford attested to Trevor's importance in shaping the ensemble. In a later interview, he remarked, "Claire brought a grounded honesty to Dallas. She never played her for pity, only for truth. That authenticity helped the film rise above genre expectations, and it helped Trevor once again prove her worth." A Navajo shaman promised John Ford special clouds and delivered. Among the many strange and fascinating anecdotes from the production of Stagecoach, few are as revealing as the story of a Navajo shaman named Hostine TSO, who made a mysterious promise to director John Ford. According to accounts from the set, Ford, who was obsessively particular about every visual detail in his films, wanted a very specific kind of cloud formation to appear during shooting in Monument Valley. But the weather was not cooperative. Ford had envisioned a backdrop of towering cumulus clouds rolling across the Utah horizon, but the weather stayed clear, and what Ford imagined refused to materialize. That's when Hostine TSO, a respected elder and shaman from the local Navajo community, was brought in. TSO had been in contact with the production, so when Ford expressed frustration over the lack of clouds, someone on set suggested that TSO might be able to help. What happened next was shocking to everyone. TSO reportedly performed a ceremonial ritual rooted in Navajo spiritual traditions, in which he promised that the exact kind of cloud formations Ford was looking for would appear the next day. The crew, skeptical, didn't expect anything to come of it, but everyone was awestruck the next day when the clouds arrived, just as TSO had described. Not only did the sky fill with the exact dramatic cumulus patterns Ford had been hoping for, but it also happened at the right time of day with the right light, and Ford got his shots. Whether or not one believes in spiritual influence over weather, the event left a strong impression on the cast and crew. No paved road through Monument Valley. Stagecoach was the first major Hollywood production that was filmed in Monument Valley, and the reason was largely due to logistics. There was no paved road in or out, and the area was considered remote, inaccessible, and practically unusable for filmmaking. But that was not a disadvantage for director John Ford. It was rather an opportunity to portray the risky, relatively low-budget Western that he was determined to make on his own terms. This was because, although Ford was already an acclaimed director in 1938, studios weren't particularly interested in Westerns at the time. So when the green light came, Ford knew he would have to protect the project from outside meddling, and he found his solution in the red rock isolation of Monument Valley, on the border of Arizona and Utah. At the time, there were no paved roads to the valley. Getting there required a rough, hours-long journey. The crew had to haul in equipment, supplies, costumes, and even water, since there was no infrastructure on site. Many questioned Ford's decision to shoot there when more convenient Western sets already existed closer to Los Angeles. But Ford had his reasons. One of his reasons was the landscape. The towering buttes, open desert, and wide skies offered a grandeur that no Hollywood backlot or California hillside could match. But his most important reason was the remoteness, which provided him with near-total creative control. Film historian Joseph McBride famously said, "There were no executives coming out to give notes when the nearest telephone was a 3-hour drive away." By setting up in Monument Valley, Ford built his own daily schedule, directed with minimal outside oversight, and allowed the harsh terrain to shape the pace and tone of the shoot. That decision paid off profitably. Geographic inconsistencies. One of the subtle yet fascinating aspects of Stagecoach lies in its geography. The film's story is about a stagecoach traveling through the rugged deserts of New Mexico and Arizona, but most of the landscapes that audiences see on screen were actually shot in Monument Valley, located on the border of Arizona and Utah. This means the geology seen in the film doesn't match the story's supposed setting. Even though the story was explicitly set in the southern New Mexico and Arizona deserts, Ford prioritized Monument Valley's cinematic grandeur over geographic accuracy. As a result, viewers familiar with the Southwest might notice some inconsistencies. For example, the iconic towering mesas and vertical rock formations of Monument Valley are geologically distinct from the more gently rolling hills, scrub brush, and desert flats typical of southern New Mexico and Arizona. This kind of geographic mixing and matching wasn't unusual for Hollywood Westerns. Back then, authenticity often took a back seat to visual spectacle. Moviegoers expected dramatic and beautiful landscapes, not accuracy. Despite the mismatch, audiences accepted the landscape as authentic because it fit the Western genre. Monument Valley soon became synonymous with the American West on film. It has since been repeated in countless Westerns that similarly ignored geography for the sake of the dramatic image. John Wayne wore his own hat in Stagecoach. In the making of Stagecoach, the hat John Wayne wore in the film was his own. Rather than relying on studio-provided costumes, Wayne brought his personal hat to the set. At the time, Stagecoach was a pivotal moment for Wayne, which would mark his breakout role as Ringo Kid. While many aspects of his performance contributed to his emerging stardom, his costume was no less important. That was why he brought the wide-brimmed cowboy hat, which added a layer of authenticity and helped establish a visual signature that audiences would come to associate with him. John Wayne's hat practically fit him well and suited the tough, no-nonsense characters he often played. This hat accompanied Wayne in many future Westerns, evolving with him, but always retaining its role as part of his trademark look. The fact that Wayne wore his own hat had practical as well as symbolic significance. It allowed him to feel more comfortable and natural in front of the camera, and also set him apart from many other actors who wore rented costumes that sometimes felt artificial. Orson Welles watched Stagecoach 40 times. When Orson Welles was preparing to direct his groundbreaking masterpiece Citizen Kane in 1941, he reportedly watched John Ford's Stagecoach 40 times. Welles described the film as a perfect textbook of filmmaking, and his intense study of it profoundly influenced his own approach to cinematic storytelling. Orson Welles was a filmmaker renowned for his meticulous attention to detail and innovative approach. Before shooting Citizen Kane, he immersed himself in the works of other great directors to learn the craft inside and out. Among these was John Ford's Stagecoach, which had quickly become a classic and was widely celebrated for its storytelling and visual artistry. The fact that Welles watched Stagecoach so many times suggests a deep analytical engagement. He wasn't only watching but studying how Ford constructed tension, developed characters, and staged action sequences. Wells believed that Stagecoach embodied the fundamental principles of cinema, which involve clear storytelling, economy of shots, and a seamless blend of character and environment. In interviews later in his career, Wells praised Ford's ability to tell a story visually without unnecessary complexity. For any aspiring filmmaker, Wells's repeated viewings serve as a reminder of the importance of studying classics. Innovative staging and camera work inside confined spaces.
Well, it's soon been lost, Mary. Sorry I flew off the handle, Hatfield. I apologize.
One of the wonders in Stagecoach is how director John Ford and his cinematographer handled the tight, cramped interior of the Stagecoach itself. The film features a large ensemble cast packed into a confined space, yet the scenes inside the coach are filmed with such innovative staging and camera techniques that they can still maintain clear, rich character interaction and high dramatic tension, all without feeling claustrophobic or visually confusing. Shooting multiple characters in a small set is difficult. The challenge is how to keep each character distinct and engaged with the audience, while also capturing the dynamic between them. Ford's solution was to use close-ups, reverse shots, and tight framing strategically. The close-ups enhanced intimacy and tension, making the viewer feel almost trapped inside with the characters. The frequent use of reverse shot enabled the film to maintain a natural, conversational rhythm, while the use of tight framing is to economize on-screen space without losing clarity. This tight framing also made the space inside the coach feel realistically cramped, which added to the film's tension. The audience could sense the physical discomfort and social pressure the characters experienced, which increased empathy and heightened the dramatic stakes. The Stagecoach was more than just a vehicle. It was a crucible where tensions bubbled and secrets were revealed. The birth scene was filmed on location, incorporating real elements and presenting environmental challenges. One of the most intimate and dramatic moments in Stagecoach is the birth scene, where Lucy Mallory, played by Louise Platt, faints and gives birth to her child. Unlike the controlled environment of a studio set, this pivotal scene was filmed on location in the remote desert, using natural light and facing many unpredictable situations in the environment. This approach added a layer of authenticity, but also brought significant logistical challenges for the cast and crew. The decision to shoot the birth scene outdoors at a desert station was deliberate. John Ford aimed to capture the raw reality of the hardships, isolation, and vulnerability that pioneers experienced. However, shooting in the desert meant contending with harsh conditions like intense sunlight, heat, wind, and shifting weather. The timing had to be precise to capture the desired natural light. Coordinating this with the actors' performances and technical requirements demanded careful planning. Louise Platt, who portrayed Mallory, had to perform under these demanding conditions. Fainting and giving birth convincingly while coping with the desert's heat and dust required stamina and focus. However, it added realism to the film. The supporting cast and crew similarly had to adapt to long hours in the sun, ensuring equipment functioned properly despite sand and temperature extremes. The birth scene itself symbolizes new life amidst danger and uncertainty. Filming it in the remote desert surrounded by authentic settings deepened this emotional resonance. The barren landscape around Lucy underscored her isolation, but also the resilience required to survive. This commitment to shooting such a sensitive scene on location with real elements exemplifies John Ford's dedication to authenticity. The river crossing was real and dangerous. One of the most thrilling moments in Stagecoach is the river crossing sequence. What many viewers may not realize is that this scene was filmed using real animals in an actual river, with the cast and crew confronting genuine risk throughout the shoot. After the Stagecoach's stop is burned by Apaches, the passengers face the perilous task of crossing a river to escape. In the film, the Stagecoach is transformed into a makeshift raft by lashing logs to its undercarriage so it will float, while the horses swim or pull the coach across the water. This sequence involved real stunt work, featuring live animals, water, and unpredictable conditions. Director John Ford, known for his dedication to authenticity, insisted on capturing the raw physicality and danger of crossing a river under duress. Rather than relying on miniatures, Ford shot the scene on location in a real river, using trained horses and stunt performers. The horses pulling the heavy stagecoach through the current were required to swim and work hard against the water's force. Coordinating animals in such conditions is notoriously difficult, and accidents could happen. The stuntmen and actors involved had to maintain their composure while ensuring safety for themselves and the animals. Yakima Canutt, the legendary stuntman who doubled for John Wayne and also performed as an Apache in the film, played a vital role in coordinating dangerous stunts like this. The decision to film the river crossing practically paid off in terms of cinematic impact. Audiences feel the tension and urgency, sensing that the characters are truly battling nature and hostile forces to survive. Yakima Canutt performed multiple dangerous stunts in Stagecoach.
The leader!
Yakima Canutt's contribution to Stagecoach was nothing short of legendary. While John Wayne is the face of the iconic chase scenes, it was Canutt who performed some of the most daring, complex, and dangerous stunts that gave the film its thrilling edge. In Stagecoach, he took on a variety of roles, most notably as an Apache warrior during the intense chase scenes. This dual capacity gave him unique insight into the physical demands and dramatic needs of the film. Among the most famous stunts Canutt performed in Stagecoach was jumping between horses at full gallop. Riding alongside charging horses, Canutt would leap from one to the other while maintaining control. Canutt also executed several falls during the chase, deliberately throwing himself off horses or the stagecoach itself. These falls were choreographed to look painful and chaotic without causing injury. One of Canutt's signature and most dangerous moves was the drag under stunt, portrayed in the famous scene where he grabs the stagecoach's harness and is then pulled under the wheels as the horses thunder overhead. This was real stunt work with no dummies or special effects. Beyond the physical feats, Canutt's performances enriched Stagecoach's action scenes with authenticity. The chase felt raw because it was powered by real skill and bravery. The burned way, station, and destroyed structures were real sets, built and filmed on location for authenticity. One of the memorable elements of Stagecoach is the striking depiction of destruction, specifically the burned way station and other ruined structures like Apache Wells and the ferry. Unlike many films of the era that relied heavily on studio miniatures or painted backdrops, Stagecoach took a remarkably authentic approach. The burned-out station and related damaged settings were built as real sets on location and physically burned for filming. The scenes involving the destruction of the way station and ferry were vital plot points, representing the brutal consequences of the Apache attack. To convey the seriousness and danger, John Ford and his production team wanted these visuals to feel convincing. Rather than rely solely on painted models, the crew constructed full-scale sets outdoors, designed to be burned or destroyed on camera. This meant the charred remains of buildings and ferries were not just props or studio illusions, they were real structures carefully built to be set aflame. The physical destruction scenes carried a tangible weight because the audience could sense that what they were seeing was real damage. In summary, the burned way station and destroyed ferry scenes in Stagecoach stand out because they were built and burned for real on location. The ending of Stagecoach was changed from daylight to night. Originally intended to be shot during the day, the final sequence was switched to a night shoot, which was largely due to the desire to hide the reuse of sets and maintain the film's visual continuity. When Stagecoach was filmed, budgets were tight and efficiency was key. The production team reused sets and locations to maximize resources. However, reusing the same set for multiple scenes could risk exposing the artificiality of the environment. The daytime lighting tends to reveal set construction. The ending scene was originally planned to take place in daylight, but during production, John Ford and his team realized that the sets used for this sequence were not distinct enough from earlier scenes, and viewers might spot the repetition. To solve this, Ford made the practical decision to shift the ending to a night scene. The night shooting allowed shadows and darkness to obscure the reused elements. This change not only conceals imperfections or repetitive elements, but also intensifies the dramatic atmosphere, creating a sense of closure and intimacy that daylight might not have conveyed as effectively. In the end, the switch to a night shoot helped maintain Stagecoach's polished look and narrative integrity. What have you learned from these weird facts about Stagecoach? Share with us in the comments and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button and watch other videos on this channel before you leave.